Welcome back to the Childhood Cancer Perspective, and thank you all for your support so far. This year and this coming into this podcast, I've been able to share the stories of so many people, so many organizations, as well as medical professionals to get a different perspective on pediatric cancer that the outside world doesn't often see. The one thing that has been really a silver lining is the people that you get to meet. It's the stories that you get to hear, but it also means that all those stories are becoming on the front lines, are becoming something that everybody gets to hear and see. So today my guest is somebody that I was able to meet through social media, and social media is a very love-hate relationship for all of us. They don't allow us to really share things in a real and raw form. So this podcast allows us to do that, say what we want, and get it out there for people to see, because those real and raw images and stories are the real reason that people actually listen to what we're saying. So today my guest is Amber. She is the mother to Griffin. And I want to preface this by saying that we have had the honor the last 2 years to be able to take Griffin's shoes to D.C. and put those at the monument doing the shoe memorial during CureFest. Of course, none of us want to be in the club where we're putting our children's shoes in a memorial, but it's an honor to be able to ensure that his name is said and that his voice is heard. So today, Amber, I'm going to turn the mic over to you and allow you to introduce yourself and tell us some more about you and Griffin.
Thank you. My name is Amber Jones. I am the mom to Griffin Jones, who is my forever 6-year-old angel. He was diagnosed at just 3.5 with acute lymphoblasticleukemia. We didn't know until after he started treatment that he actually had the Philadelphia chromosome, which would make things way more complicated. He originally was treated at Riley's Children's in Indy. He responded well to treatment. He was in forced remission after induction 1A, so he was not in remission after the first induction. Some things happened at the hospital that I was not happy with. They nearly killed him. I had him transferred to Monroe Carroll Children's Hospital in Vanderbilt, and they were absolutely amazing. Within a few weeks of being in treatment there, they had him where he needed to be. It was like he was a totally different child. His counts were obviously plummeted for being in treatment, but he was just doing so much better than when he was at Riley's. Once we found out that he had the Philadelphia chromosome, he had to change routes. He no longer could do the clinical trial that he was in originally. We ended up having to go through a randomization to whether he could either take like a lighter chemo where there wasn't as much frontline, or he would have to go through 3 consolidation blocks of really intensive chemotherapy. At the time, we thought it was unfortunate that we got the inpatient off and on for 3 months of the intensive consolidation blocks inpatient. He did well. We almost lost him a couple times, but Monroe Carroll was absolutely amazing. I can't say their praises enough. Every time that, a doctor would tell us that, they didn't know if he was going to make it or just something negative, he would pull through and show us just how strong his fight was and prove the doctors wrong. So throughout his entire journey, that was kind of our motto was, Griffin was going to prove the doctors wrong every single time. I kind of began to lean on that and believe that was true all the way through. Completed treatment. He was diagnosed originally July 3rd of 2020. July 4th of 2020. Oh my gosh. He completed treatment July 8th of 2022. For a month, I fought with doctors and oncologists in the hospital that something was wrong. He kept complaining that the front of his neck hurt, his head hurt. I knew something wasn't right, and I knew in my heart that he had relapsed, but no one would listen to me, just like in the beginning because of COVID. And he had COVID, and they were like, well, COVID, causes headaches, COVID causes throat pain, COVID causes this, blah, blah, blah. I got pretty mad, pretty irate. I told the oncologist, I was like, look, I get COVID is serious. I get it's real, but COVID is not everything. Our kids have cancer. He did just complete treatment. He's very sick. I said, but in my heart, I know my son, and I know something's not right. So finally my family doctor brought him in after his right eye deviated inward one night, and it never returned. And she ordered an immediate, I can't remember if it was a CT or an MRI of his brain. and it showed hydrocephalus, very serious pushing on his brain. And it was so bad that the doctors argued with me that he hadn't relapsed because his blood work, it didn't reflect his blood work. It was only in his CNS to begin with. And the doctors at Gateway here, which was our home hospital, told me that it wasn't leukemia. They didn't know what it was, but it wasn't leukemia. And I told them I knew what it was. I wanted to be transferred to Vanderbilt, and that if they did not transfer us, then I would pull my son and I would drive him there myself. And they told me I couldn't do that, that, they would talk to Vanderbilt, see what they wanted to do. So in the meantime, while they're on the phone with Vanderbilt, I am messaging and calling the hospital at Vanderbilt and telling them what's going on and telling them I want my son transferred. I either want him transferred or I want them to tell them to release him so that I can drive him there myself. So eventually the doctor comes back in, says they talked to Vanderbilt, whoever, and they're going to transfer him. So they finally transfer him. When I get there, it's so bad. The on-call oncologist comes in the room, and she's like, we don't know. We don't have it confirmed yet, but we suspect he's relapsed. At this point, I already know. I told you I'd known for a month in my heart that he's relapsed. And she kind of holds my hand, and I'm a little bit angry at this point because as a parent, I'm sure we know our children better than anyone else. And so morning comes and we get the confirmation that nobody wanted, but we all knew was true. And we get back up to our home floor, which was a 6th floor, which all the nurses, they become like family, and they're all hugging me and they're like, we're sorry to see you, but we're happy to see you. And his oncologist comes in and she's crying and she hugs me and she says, Amber, I'm so sorry. She said, you've known for weeks. She said, if it's any consolidation, she said, now we know that, front neck pain can be a sign of relapse as well. And I was like, I'm glad that can help other children. I said, but that doesn't help my son. And so we start the whole process over again. We knew from the very beginning that if he ever relapsed, our only treatment option was a bone marrow transplant. From the very beginning, I never wanted him to have to be on a vent. I never wanted him to have to go through radiation, and I never wanted him to have a bone marrow transplant. In my heart, I knew if we ever had to do any of those, that we would lose him. I just knew it. And so when we got that, I just fell apart. Sorry, I lost my train of thought. They came in and told us our options, that we would have to do blinatumomab, which was the backpack chemotherapy, which is now apparently frontline treatment, which would have been amazing back then. He thrived on it. Insurance denied us going home on it, so he got locked down to the hospital for 3 months, which unfortunately would have been his last 3 months on earth. He was tied down to the hospital. He got 1 week between the blinatumomab cycle and when he had to have his bone marrow transplant, which was his 6th birthday. So he got to celebrate his 6th birthday out of the hospital. The next day, he got admitted to start radiation. He was put to sleep twice a day for 3 days to undergo radiation. He had to have total body radiation, and he had to have cranial radiation. And he also had to have, I'm sorry, I can't recall the name of the chemotherapies because my brain has blocked it, but he had to have a very high dose of some kind of chemotherapy that just wipes your cells out completely so that your bone marrow donors' cells can take over. His oldest sister was his match, and he underwent the transplant on the 15th of December of 2022. Up until then, he was doing really well. He was up moving around. He was eating. He did end up having to have a feeding tube because obviously, he had to be sedated twice a day. He couldn't eat a whole lot. We wanted to get his energy up. He was doing surprisingly well. He was engrafting. And then one morning, I was like I don't know what you would call it. I was very obsessed with his charts. I had it on my phone, and I would check it religiously anytime that they had anything done. I knew how to read it. I did the research. There was never any test or decision that I made or we made without me researching it thoroughly, asking doctors, asking nurses, asking other parents and support groups that have been through it before us. I'm just kind of trying to get a whole roundabout picture of what we would be going through. And as much guilt as I have, I know that I never just spur of the moment made a decision. Unfortunately, my signature is on every single test procedure he ever had, which has it carries a lot of guilt with it. But his liver labs came back and they were extremely elevated, like in the thousands. And I ran out of the room to the nurse's desk and I said, I want to talk to the doctor. Before they could even pick up the phone, the resident, because all children's hospitals are training hospitals, the resident was running down the hall. And he's like, it's not right. It's not right. He's like, I knew you were going to see it. He's like, we're repeating it right now. As I'm standing there, the repeated lab pops up and it's even higher. And I was like, we need to do a CT, we need to do an ultrasound, we need to do whatever. Like, something's not right. And he's like, no, like, insurance won't cover that. We can't do that. He's like, we'll do it. And I think they did a bedside ultrasound or something, which didn't show anything. His abdomen distended and my 6-year-old son looked like he was pregnant. And he just couldn't hardly move. And he was in pain. And I knew something wasn't right. He ended up going into the PICU. We didn't realize it at the time, but his liver had shut down. And so he was on a pain pump, and he had put himself, or his body had put him into a medically induced coma, basically, because he was on a dilated pain pump. So as we were giving him medicine, his body couldn't get rid of it, and so it was staying in his body. So he went into a coma, and they didn't think he would ever wake up. They kept telling me that the odds were not good. He had veno-occlusive disease. He ended up on a continuous, all these things are blending together. He ended up on a machine to filter out his kidneys because his liver caused his kidneys to shut down. And he couldn't pee, and it just caused so much issues. I can't think of continuous dialysis machine. He had a central line in his neck. He was in that coma. He could move. He could hear me. He said he woke up Christmas morning and told me he loved me. And he told me that he could hear me, but he couldn't respond. He couldn't talk to me. And we got to go back up to the floor on New Year's Eve. And in my head, I knew that he was going to be healed. I knew it was going to be a hard road, but I was like, God wouldn't let my son be healed and give me that hope and let him just give him that much fight and let us back up on the floor and just let everything be resolved, just to let us suffer all over again. So I cherish those moments. We celebrated New Year's Eve with the nurses. Everybody was, celebrating about how strong he was and how surprised they were to see how fast he bounced back. And he had to have a tube to drain all of the ascites, extra fluid in his abdomen from where, his body still was fighting that veno-occlusive disease. He still had to have dialysis 3 times a week because he still couldn't pee right, but he was learning to rewalk. He was getting up and moving around. He was laughing. He was back to his semi-normal self and playing jokes on people and just laughing. And so I got my hopes up. I actually was able to smile and enjoy my son. I was by myself. I did this whole inpatient stay by myself, and he was doing good. I don't remember the exact dates. And a few weeks later, I guess, a couple weeks later, he took a turn for the worst, and he ended up back in the PICU. I can't remember exactly what it was that landed us there. He was on the continuous dialysis where he had the central line in his neck. I couldn't hold him really. I couldn't do a whole lot. I could just hold his hand. Sometimes physical therapy would come and they would let me hold him on the bed or hold him in the chair, but it was few and far between. He was back in basically a coma. They didn't know what happened. He tested positive for aspergillus, which is a fungal infection of his lungs. He just kind of went to sleep and never woke back up. And then one night, a resident, all the alarms started going off, and I didn't know what happened, and they pushed me out of the room, which I'd already had to make the decision. They take in this room, and so to back up, they rushed him down to the PICU, and they asked me that night what they wanted me or what I wanted them to do. And I was like, what do you mean? And they said, what do you want us to do for your son? And I said, do whatever it takes to bring him back to me, whatever. And he said, what? And the doctor was like, you mean whatever? And I was like, whatever it takes, whatever to save him. And of course, that was me freaking out. That was me panicking, not thinking from a place of sanity. I just wanted my son. And so they get him stable. Well, a couple of days later, oncologist, the palliative care doctor and his normal oncologist that had been like family sat me down, and they were like, you need to really think about this. His abdomen's distended, life-saving measures are chest compressions. Do you understand what that means? And I was like, well, I mean, I know that it's to bring him back. And they're like, so they literally did the motions to make me understand that they literally break the ribs and they try to jumpstart their heart. And they said, even if it brought his heart back, like, he wouldn't be the same person. He wouldn't be strong enough to heal from the damage. It would cause more damage to him than it would. And they said at that point, it would be more about what you're doing to him than helping. So I had to make a hard decision not to do that, in order not to be selfish, but to make the best decision for my son. And so I opted to do the vent, even though I had a bad feeling about it. I figured at least they can wean him off. There's different things now that they can do. It wouldn't necessarily cause harm, but everything but compressions. And so when the time came that they pushed me out of the room, I was told if it happened, I could stay in the room with him. They would just kind of let nature take its course, and I could spend as much time with him as I wanted. Well, they pushed me out of the room, and so I was angry and I was confused, and he was telling me that I couldn't be in there until they figured out what was going on. And he told me that my son might not make it through the night. And of course, I lost it. I fell on the floor. I was screaming. I mean, you're not rational in that moment. That's your baby. I mean, I don't know how they expect you to be quiet and civil or whatever. So he tells me I need to be quiet. I'm scaring other parents. And he takes me into this little cubby and he tells me until I calm down, I can't go back in the room. And I'm like, well, you're not going to calm me down by keeping me away from my son. For one, I need to be with him. I need to know what's going on. He's by himself. He doesn't know anyone. I was like, he could pass away and I'm not in there. And so he says, I'll be right back. He's like, let me go see what's going on. So he comes back and he's like, they're trying to stabilize him. He's like, we still don't really know what's going on. So there was a lot going on in our personal lives at that point to why I was there by myself, and a lot more that added to the stress, and just, I won't go into that, but I told him that I needed an exception because we were in the PICU, that I needed to be able to lift the EPO that was in place. I needed his dad to be there. I needed whatever lawyers they had to call. I needed it done now. And he's like, well, it might not happen tonight. Why don't we wait? And I was like, 30 minutes ago, however long ago it was, I said, you told me my son wasn't going to make it through the night. And I said, now you're telling me he might make it. I said, I'm not willing to gamble. I said, his dad needs to be here. I said, I would never forgive myself if he passed away and his dad didn't get to tell him goodbye. I would have to live with that for the rest of my life. So he just kept beating around the bush. So I went above his head. I called the chaplain in. I called my attorney to call him. They ended up having to wake up the judge. It was a whole big thing, but we got it passed. He ended up getting there. It ended up his blood pressure had bottomed out, so they gave him something through the IV. I don't know if it was epinephrine. I can't remember. But it brought it back up, and his heart, it came back up, and he was still in a coma, but he was stable. My family got there. His dad got there. It was really emotional. We just were kind of standing around him. They came in to talk to us, told us that in the morning we would have, so they had rounds every morning, and usually they would talk about the patient, talk about the plans. That was the most painful rounds that I'd ever been through, because they literally talked about my son like he was already gone, like he wasn't even a patient. Basically, they had already made the decision that they weren't going to do anything to try to save him. They weren't going to continue his feedings. They weren't going to give him any of his medications. They weren't going to do anything. And I got angry, and they ended up telling me that that wasn't the time or place that we would have a meeting later on with all of his team. So this meeting literally was his dad and I wanted the chaplain in there for my own support and his original oncologist, and then it seemed like 20 doctors, nurses, anybody on his team. There is worse, losing your child and burying them, but there is a close third to sitting in a room, going in a circle, and listening to upwards of 20 people tell you that there's no hope for your child over and over and over. And when they're done, basically telling you that you don't have a choice, that it's basically selfish to keep your son here. He's not here, that there's no hope. He wasn't on a vent, he was on vapotherm, which is just like a high flow oxygen. And now, looking back, I have a lot of regrets. Like, I wonder if we had given him more time, could he have came out of it like he did before? If we had continued, you know, the dialysis and the feeding tubes and his medicines, if I had fought harder, like, the what ifs lay you alive. But family came. They first tried to move us to a bigger room, saying that it would allow more family to come. And I said, you're not moving my son. You're not unhooking him from anything. I don't want to rush this process. Like, I don't want anything to change that could possibly alter his current state. Like, if you move rooms, if you unhook him, like, something could happen, and I'm not ready for that. So we stayed in that room, and family came, they said their goodbyes. Wildlife came and did fingerprints and did his heartbeat and did a bunch of keepsakes for his dad and I and the kids, and we brought our kids in to say goodbye to their brother. That was almost harder than his dad and I saying goodbye. To have to watch your kids not really understand that was the last time they were going to see their brother. The little ones didn't understand why their brother wouldn't open his eyes or why he wouldn't talk to them or all of this because of treatment that was meant for adults, which angers me. So they came in and I wouldn't say they bullied us, but I would say they kind of pressured us into making the decision to do it soon. And so I made the decision that we were going to do it at 5 o'clock, that family was going to leave, and it was just going to be his dad and I. We were going through a divorce. Obviously, things were tense, but I felt it was important for it to just be him and I, because I brought him into the world together. I felt it was important that we saw him out of the world together. And so family left, and I think we had agreed on like 7 or 6:30, 7:30, I don't know. When the time came, neither his dad or I were ready. Like, you're never going to be ready to give up on your child and say goodbye. So they agreed to give us more time. While we were sitting there holding him, his heart rate dropped, and we panicked, and we just both held him, and we were crying, and we told him how much we loved him and how proud we were, and he was so brave, and that, you know, he would be okay, that we loved him, that, you know, he fought hard and he won, and it was okay to be done, and that, you know, we all loved him and we would miss him, and that we would be okay. And as soon as he heard our voice, his heart rate just shot back up. And the nurses said that that's common, that loved ones will fight to stay with familiar voices, with their parents, with whoever. And at that moment, we both knew that he would fight as long as he could to stay with us. So we felt it was selfish to keep him on all these machines and just here suffering just so that we could have him here. So we went ahead, and the first thing was to stop the blood pressure medicine, so they stopped that. And then the next thing was to turn off the vapotherm, and of course nothing is as simple as just turning it off. It's a slow process. So they stood at the back of the room and they slowly turned it down, and every time they would turn it down, it was like a loud beep, and then they told us when they turned it down that, like, it would only be a few hours we would have left with him. So every time they would turn it down, like, we would both hold our breaths, and he was laying on my chest, Griffin was, and I could feel his breathing and his heartbeat, and every time that would happen, I would just hold my breath and just hold him tighter and, like, expect him to just be gone, and he would keep breathing. It'd be more labored, but he would keep breathing. And so finally, like, it was shut off and it was just silenced. All you could hear was just Griffin's labored breathing, which breaks your heart to hear your child struggle. It makes you just want to turn everything back on. So they had already taken all the tubes and everything out, because I'd already told them, you know, I wanted to be as close to him as I could be. And
they left the room. They turned the monitors off before they left because they knew that I knew how to read all of them and I knew everything that was going on, and they didn't want me to focus on what was going on. They wanted me to be in the moment with my son, which I appreciated, but it also drove me crazy because I had no idea what was going on. I was kind of blinded. So, I don't know, it was probably like 8 or 9 by the time everything was shut off. We laid in the bed with him. Griffin was on my chest to chest, and his dad was laying beside us on the bed, and every so often they'd come in and listen to his heart, and I could feel it beating, and I would sing to him, and I would just rub his back, and I would try to memorize every little inch of him, because I knew it was the last time that I would see him. So I was like holding his hand in mine, and like trying to memorize how it felt, and the weight of him, and his eyes, and just every inch of his perfect little body. And she came in at like 11, and they were like, he sure is a fighter, he's proven us wrong again, which of course gave me hope again. And I prayed and begged to God. You know, we had gone to social media to storm heaven with prayers for him for a miracle, and I had prayed all along that, you know, if God wasn't going to give him another miracle, because we'd almost lost him a couple times before, if his quality of life wasn't going to be the same, if he was going to suffer, if any of that, to just take Griffin on Griffin's terms and let it be painless. He kept fighting, he kept breathing, so I kept having hope that, you know, he was going to breathe on his own, he was going to wake up and prove everybody wrong. So through all of this, I was crying, and I was, you know, preparing for the worst but hoping for the best. So she comes in, it's about midnight. There was supposed to be winter storm or something, I don't know. She said she was going to go check on her dogs. She said if something happened, there was someone there in the meantime, but if not, she would be back to check on us when she got back. We fell asleep, and before I fell asleep, I had prayed that, you know, maybe if it was meant to be, to just take Griffin while we were all sleeping, and he was sleeping and peacefully, and he knew he was loved, and that, you know, it would just be I guess that was selfish. It would just be simple. I mean, it would just be simple. Like, he would just drift off to sleep. Well, then I woke up at like 1, and I freaked out because he was still in my chest, and I freaked out and I kind of like held my breath, and he was still breathing, and I thank God that he didn't take him while I was sleeping, and I begged him not to take him while I was sleeping, to just take him while we were all awake, so that he knew that we were there, and he wasn't alone, and that we loved him. So I woke his dad up, and I told him to hold Griffin because I felt it was important that he held him as well, because I had held him for hours and hours, and I prayed to God to not let him pass while his dad was holding him. I know that's selfish, but as a mom, I just wanted to be the one holding him. So he held him, and they slept together for an hour or 2 or so, and then I got him back, and I held him, and I sang to him, and I prayed over him, and I begged and pleaded, and just everything I could. Again, tried to memorize everything, and told him how proud I was, how hard he'd fought. I just laid awake for hours listening to him breathe and his heartbeat, and tried to memorize it. We fell asleep, we woke up, they came in again, checked his heart rate, said that it was slowing down. It probably wouldn't be long. At that point, we texted the nurses upstairs and told them that they should come and say their final goodbyes, and it was like a revolving door. How many people in that hospital Griffin touched? Any nurse, tech, the x-ray guy. I mean, it was amazing to see how many people knew of our son and loved him. And they all came in and kissed his head or held his hand with a hug us or whatever and say their goodbyes. We ended up donating his favorite little truck that he would pedal with his feet with his little logo on it to the floor. And we gave the floor his picture to put on the wall, which we always thought would be as a survivor and not as an angel. And it was of his 6th birthday, the last birthday that he got to celebrate here. And his 2 favorite nurses spent time with us. And then we slept some more, and they came in at like noon and said it wasn't going to be long at all. And at 12:51, I felt him at noon, 12:30, something like that, he started like really labor breathing, and his heart, he started slowing it down, and they came in and prepared us, and they said, we want to prepare you that it can be kind of ugly at the end. They can gasp for breath, they can grab onto you, they can open their eyes. You can think that they're, coming back, and it's really the end. There's really no preparing you for it. They let go. It can be a lot. Well, Griffin was laying on me. Wes had put his arms up on me. The one thing they didn't tell me is that when you are dying, your heart is only trying to keep your trunk, what's closest to your heart, warm. So his hands were ice cold. His ear on my chest was ice cold. His face was ice cold. Everything that wasn't his chest was ice cold. And it was the most chilling feeling. His heartbeat, but his body was ice cold. So they came in, and then they said it wouldn't be long or whatever, and they were in the room. And at 12:51, I didn't feel anything, and I panicked. And they did their exams or whatever, and pronounced him gone. And they told us to take as much time as possible. I made a big deal about wanting to be there for his last bath, but when he took his last breath, it literally, like, he just breathed out, and he just didn't anymore. And I kept waiting and waiting and waiting because I had hope that he would just come back. And I held him until I felt him get stiff, and I couldn't handle it. I lost it. They had to walk me down to a different room. And then by the time that they had calmed me down, they had already given him a bath and changed him into the clothes that I wanted. And he didn't even look like my baby anymore. He looked peaceful, but my best friend was with us, and she took care of talking to people, because I know it's their job, but they don't give you time to process. They literally want to know what funeral home, this, like, they ask you a million questions right after you lose your child, and you're literally living hell on earth and every parent's worst nightmare. They expect you to be able to just, like you should have had it planned all along. And I never let myself believe that would be my child. Just like no one wants to believe their child will ever have cancer. I never, from the beginning of the diagnosis, ever let that thought creep into my head that he wouldn't make it. Because if you do, you're already giving up on your child. And then his dad carried him down the hallway to the elevator, where we had to give him to the nurse and leave him, which was another one of the hardest things to do. And then literally, as I'm walking, well, I wasn't walking, as the nurses helped me out of the hospital because I was so distraught, I get a text saying that someone you love has been discharged from our hospital, and a couple hours later, have no access to his electronic records anywhere. It's like they just disappear. And it's the most insensitive thing. I called the hospital actually to complain about it, because it wasn't just it was a hospital, it was the doctor's offices, it was everywhere. It's like he didn't exist. And that was what I did. It might sound messed up, but that's what I did to, like, cope. If he would get, like, a bad or whatever, I would obsessively review his, I don't know, I guess it's as a medical parent, that's just kind of how I unwound or whatever, is obsessing over labs and stuff.
Well, it's a lot of information to take in, and I appreciate you taking the time to share all of it with me. And the worst part, obviously the worst part is losing our children, but the worst part about this is hearing so many of the bullet points. I wrote down so much over here that mirror exactly what we went through. And that's the issue, is that there's so many problems that we're not able to fix right now, and it's such a detriment to our children. I did the same thing with the records. I remember when I was in the hospital with our daughter, when we were in there for her stem cell transplant, they would come in at 4 o'clock in the morning and draw labs, and by 6, I would get a notification saying the labs were done. I got the notification before they came in to tell me what was going on.
Yeah.
And at that point, the only thing I was looking for was her counts to be up so that we could know that her stem cell transplant was working. And the doctor would come in, I'd say, hey, it's at 0.1. It's a positive. And she'd say, oh, yeah, we're on the right track. It's very little. And did the same thing, focus on these records. And it brings me to a point of something that we've been dealing with on social media lately, which is being called average. We are, in fact, average parents. We're average people with average jobs and average lives. And we do everything just like our daily life. But the difference is when it comes to our kids, we don't get to clock in and clock out. We know what their baselines are. We know what the ups and downs are, and we understand what these treatments are. We understand what the drugs are, what they do, how they make the kids feel when something's not right. And we're not given the credit, and neither are these kids. They're not given the credit for understanding everything that's going on. Going through all of this as a parent and watching your child, you feel like you failed because our one job is to protect our kids. And we couldn't do it against this. And it's impossible to protect them against this, but we should at least be given the opportunity to have the correct facilities, the correct team, the correct group of people that are willing to do everything that it takes, and that you become a person and not just a patient number.
Yeah.
And that becomes true when you found the right team, and then you had nurses or doctors or child life specialists, anybody that are coming in that were touched by Griffin. It's important because you know that as a kid, and I am left with this every single day, at JC's funeral, I didn't cry until the pastor said one thing. He said, when JC walked up to heaven's gates, try to get through this one, and said, I only had 8 years. But she was told, but look what you did with those 8 years. That's the same thing for Griffin. These kids make such an incredible impact in such a short amount of time. And you will. For us, it's almost 4 years since we lost Jace. And for us, we are still feeling the impact of what she's done. And you will still feel the impact for years to come from people you never know. When that name is spoken and this story is told, you realize what an impact these kids have. But being able to tell these stories real and raw like you did is what really needs to happen more and more and more. Our lawmakers, our legislators, our doctors, our teams of nurses, all of these people, real world, every single day people that walk and turn their backs on the pediatric cancer community because they don't think that it's a problem, need to hear these stories. They need to see the pictures that we have. I know that I have them that I've never shared with the world. I know that I laid my ear and my head on my daughter's chest and I heard her heart stop. I know that because she was dealing with brain cancer, that within the last 30 minutes of her passing, and passing takes a long damn time.
Yeah.
It is not shut the lights off and it's over. Their bodies are strong. Their souls, their hearts, everything within them is tough.
Yeah.
And it takes a long damn time, and it is the worst. And when she passed, within hours of her, before it happened, because of the way the body's moving and the organs are shutting down, blood came out of her nose out of nowhere. Scared the hell out of my wife and I. And they said, that's not a problem. It's just, that's the tumor.
Mm-hmm.
And the breathing did the same thing, labored. Deep breaths, and then nothing for 20 seconds, and you thought that was it. And then all of a sudden she'd breathe again, and we would laugh. We'd say she's playing tricks on us.
Yeah.
She's just playing as she's going out. These kids, I looked at my daughter right before she went into that sleep that they don't wake up from, and I said, are you okay? And she looked at me, and she shook her head yes. These kids know what's going on, and all they care about is us.
Yeah, that was the hardest part, was you cared about everybody else.
They know that they're going to be whole again, and they just want to make sure that we're going to be okay on the other side here. And we know that we'll see them again someday. But until then, this sucks.
Yeah.
Because this is not what we're supposed to do. We're not supposed to have somebody come in and say, what funeral home do you want 20 minutes after they pass?
No.
If we had the same thing, we Googled the closest one to us and said, let's just go here. Because again, we never planned for this, even when she went on hospice care. Like, yes, you have an idea in your head of what's going to happen or what could happen. People can be on hospice care for years, and so you don't plan and think, okay, this is what's going to happen. I think the refusal to plan your child's funeral is absolutely understood. You plan your parents' funeral. Maybe you plan your own because whatever of your age, but you don't plan your kid's funeral because that's not what we're supposed to do. That's completely intuitive to what we think is life. And, going through and kind of, listening to everything. And I wrote a list of bullet points here as you're talking and thinking that all of these things are lining up with everything we went through. And so many other parents out there are dealing with this. And the one thing, I just posted a video 2 hours ago about always trust your mama bear gut. Mm-hmm. Always trust it. Something's wrong or something's not going right, you speak up. You absolutely speak up. And if a doctor doesn't mesh well with you, get them out of there. If a nurse has a bad day and come in with a bad attitude, take it somewhere else. And that's you, that you're supposed to do that. We're supposed to be able to advocate for our kids and not be told that, you should calm down. You calm down. Look at what we're going through right now. You're going to get to go home in a couple hours and clock out and do this again tomorrow. I don't get to leave. So it's that kind of stuff. It drives me crazy because, again, we don't have the chance to walk away. This is, I brought up a point not too long ago and had a huge argument with somebody. And they said, do you think you're smarter than a doctor? And I said, yes. And I said, not book smart, because I didn't go to school, but I live this every single day. I don't get to walk away. I don't get to turn it off. And life experience in real life, absolutely living it, absolutely can take precedence over what you spent 4 years, 8 years, 10 years in school learning, because no classroom will ever prepare you for what we're going through on a daily basis, what our kids are going through, and what's happening. Coming in and telling us that it's okay, that it won't be long now, this is what you can expect. That's your book. It doesn't always happen that way. And, we as parents don't get to walk away from that. So, yes, do I think I'm smarter than a doctor? For real life experience, for, spending 52 days in the hospital with my daughter, spending all my chemo treatment or her chemo treatments away from my family, missing things with my other kids, because I, too, had to walk into my daughter's rooms, both of them, and say she's gone. Yeah, I think that we're smarter than doctors because I think that we live it. That when you live it, instead of learning it and you're thrown into it, I think you learn a hell of a lot faster. And we're put into a school where we don't have a choice but to learn it right now, learn it yesterday, and understand what we're doing. Signing documents, right? Signing every single document when they have a page that says this is what the treatment is, and 36 pages of side effects and what may happen, with the very top one saying death. And there's small chances that all this stuff is going to happen, but there's 100% chance of what we know will happen if we don't try. And in the end also, there's a form with 3 letters on it that my wife and I signed, and my other 2 daughters, hated us for it. A DNR. You signed a DNR for your kid, your child, saying don't bring them back if they code, because we know that bringing them back, they're going to be in it's so detrimental to them, that it would be worse and they wouldn't even have a life. And to explain that to my kids was them telling us, one especially, you've given up on her.
Yeah, but you had it.
Yeah, we never did. We never gave up. We never quit. We just knew, right? The CPR, the intubation, the whatever it would take to keep them alive would be so much more detrimental to them in the long run and cause more injury and more pain than just letting them pass peacefully. And being able to lay there with them, we signed our daughter out AMA to bring her home because we said she's not going to stay in this hospital. Absolutely not. And they fought us. They fought us hard on it and made us sign a DNR before we left the hospital because they said she's going to code on the way home. And I said, but then she'll code with us, period. And we took her home and she died in her bed, which is where she wanted to be, in her own room. And, and you guys were in the hospital. But the thing is, you were with her. or you were with him, we were with her, you had that connection, and they knew that they were going to be okay. We're never going to be okay. We're never going to be able to get over this. But it's how you choose to kind of move forward with things. You never move on, and you never ever move on. You move forward with life, and you find a new normal, and you figure out how to do it. And you have good days and bad days, and you focus on all the smiles that you had, all that joy that Griffin brought to your life, and still does. We do the same thing. And in the very beginning, within the first couple of days, I asked the question. I said, "Are we allowed to smile? Like, is it okay to laugh?
Yeah.
Or is it okay?" Because I felt bad. I felt guilty.
I feel like people look at you weird too. Like if you're happy or smiling or post a picture smiling, they look at you. I've had people message like, "What's wrong with you?" And why I just feel cruel.
Yeah, there is. We've always said there's no perfect way to grieve. There's no right or wrong way to grieve. And I think our family has taken away, and again, it's for everybody's different. We've just decided to throw all of our effort and time into our work, into our efforts to try to make a difference. Everything we do legislatively now, everything we do, with Washington or with Madison, it's to save others. Like, we could not save JC. So what we're doing now is not to save her. It's to save other people. And if we can make a difference in somebody else's life, if we can find a treatment or a therapy that can help moving forward, yes, it is extremely bittersweet. When we go to DC every year and we hear about breakthrough things that are happening and studies and funding and research, we're happy, but we're also sad at the same time, because the same thing is, why couldn't this happen 10 years ago? Why couldn't this happen when our daughter needed it, when Griffin needed it? Why couldn't it? Yeah, and that's the biggest issue, right? It's very bittersweet, but at the same time, I want to see change move forward, because that's our children's legacies, is to ensure that their names are never forgotten, that they didn't pass in vain, and that moving forward they can continue to touch and help people the way that they did while they were here. And I wrote down too little too late, because that was, we hear about, it's a breakthrough therapy, but it's a breakthrough treatment. But there's clinical trials that are on the cusp of coming through the pipeline right now. Clinical trials are weird, because you can't be too well and you can't be too sick. You've got to be somewhere in the middle. And timing is very, very critical with that type of thing. And a lot of these therapies, there's no protocol, depending on the type of cancer that you have and the type of thing you're dealing with, there's no real protocols. And there's just, like, if you meet a group of people that have the same type, or the children have the same type, like for us especially, you'll notice that nobody has the same therapy. Nobody even has the same drugs, which just proves to us that you're throwing darts at a board and saying, we'll see what happens. And it's scary. It's scary. You spoke a little bit about the stem cell transplant, or the bone marrow transplant, and the high dose chemos. These high dose chemos it is like a bulldozer running through a very small china shop, and there's nothing left. And these high dose chemotherapies come in hard, and they come in extremely fast. And we're talking like 30 rounds within a couple days. And they push them so fast because you are meant to clean your system out to absolutely nothing, which means you are susceptible to everything. And most kids develop C. diff, mucositis, and that's a terrible thing in itself. You can't be near germs, period. We had a norovirus outbreak on the floor that we were on, and we were both quarantined in the room for a week. We couldn't leave because anything could come in, and they're extremely susceptible to something happening. Yep. They had, she took the one chemotherapy was the only one that excretes through your pores, which means baths like 3 times a day for a week. And the nurses were sweet. They made her a little bath chart with stickers and stuff. And, you try to take their mind off of things, but what that stuff does and what it's meant to do it's actually kind of crazy to me. I've always asked, why isn't that the first step? You know what I mean? Like, you go through chemotherapies that are meant to target certain types of tumors or cells or whatever, but why not just knock everything out and start over from the beginning? almost. I don't necessarily understand it all, and nobody's really given me a good explanation of it, because I mean, our daughter donated her own stem cells, and so then they were put back into her body, and it was, everything went well. There was no graft versus host disease or anything like that, which is super terrible. And that, for lack of a better way to put it, just means that your cells are fighting, or your body's fighting off what's coming in it, and it can be bad. But yeah, I've always wondered why we don't do the most intense. It's always left as a last resort, essentially, stem cell and high dose things.
So did she have?
What's that?
So what she had, was it where they take hers out and they harvest them and they put them back in? Like they do something to make them to where they target the cancer cells?
So it's basically, so they didn't do all. Basically, she did was she donated all of her cells, and then they extract the stem cells and they put them back in. So there was nothing done to them to like supercharge them, like creating like a better natural killer cell, which is a therapy now that can be done and stuff like that. But this one, it literally just pulled them and put them back in. But again, the understanding is beyond me, because these cells are extracted after all of her chemotherapies and things like that, and then they're taken out. It's almost like, I don't know why the cells, I don't know. That's the book stuff that I don't understand. That's the stuff that I don't understand. But also that I didn't even realize that a blood-brain barrier was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
And, they do all these chemos for our daughter with brain cancer that all went this way. And then when they say we're going to do stem cells, they say because that way the high-dose chemotherapies break the blood-brain barrier. I'm like, what the hell were we doing before?
Didn't they do it to break the blood-brain barrier all along?
And none of it did. And she had targeted radiation, so the tumor never grew back in the spot where they resected it, which was good. So the radiation did its job. But when she relapsed and the tumor ended up on her brainstem, so it was inoperable. And that's when they decided, okay, we're gonna do the stem cells because that'll break the blood-brain barrier. But that was my first question, like, why didn't we do that earlier, where it goes up here? Or my newest question after that was discovered, or after she ended up in the hospital with a seizure, I said, why did we never treat her intrathecally and have the chemo going right in?
Yeah.
And they never did. And it's, that becomes one of those things where when your child is diagnosed, and there's a difference. Like with us, we were sent home until they developed a plan. It wasn't too long, and some people, it's okay. Your child has XYZ. We're going to start treatment today, and it's a difference. It's a toss-up where they're going to do it, and that's another thing. But we're not given a whole hell of a lot of time to research what needs to be done or what should be done before it's actually thrown in our face. And at that point, as parents, you're like, well, shit, do I not do something?
Yeah.
Or, and you're in a real weird position. So unfortunately for us, by the time I figured out the way I think it should have been done, it was too late, because she had shunts installed, and at that point anything would have just washed out anyway.
Oh.
So it's a crapshoot. Like, yes, we do the research, but we're also not given any time to do that research, and a lot of times it's too late. And that's where it comes down to us kind of advocating for, number one, listening to what we're saying as parents. Number two, pediatricians or ER doctors or, urgent care, wherever you end up taking your child, that they are looking for the zebras and not the horses. And this, you know what I mean? And not saying, okay, well, your child has constipation and that's what this, whatever. And our daughter's eye turned in too. That's what prompted us to go, thank God for my sister working for an ophthalmologist, that we were able to get her in an emergency and see swelling in her optic nerve. That's what got us to the hospital to actually get her diagnosed. But without that, my wife took her to the ER, and they said, we don't see the eye turning in. Well, you look straight at her and it would go. And they're like, we don't see it, or it's probably nothing, and whatever. You're cast off. You're cast off far too much. And we know what our children's baselines are. We know what's wrong and right, and it's not about questioning your medical degree. It's about you pulling your head from your ass and realizing that we, as parents, understand things and realize that something's not right here. Listen to what we have to say, and just give it a chance. And I'm not saying that every child that comes in with constipation or their eye turning in has cancer, right? We're not saying that. We're also not saying that every pediatrician should immediately go to that level. But you should also be willing to understand that's a possibility and put it in the back of your mind as a thought if these things don't pan out, versus, the months that we went through trying to figure out. My wife ended up in an ER where she said they put her in a room and there was a camera because we're pretty sure they thought she was crazy. She had been to so many ERs trying to figure out what the hell was going on. And that's not the way the parents should feel. Like we're intentionally trying to hurt our kids or intentionally trying to, I don't want to go to the ER. I don't want to be there,
I think when Griffin was diagnosed, like I said, it was July 4th of 2020, so COVID was just ramped up and everything was COVID. Anything that was wrong, if you had a fever, you couldn't go in public. You couldn't go to the pediatrician's office. A week prior, if you had a fever, you would go to the doctor's office. That was normal. And so my ex-husband worked at Jim David's, which was like a meat factory type germ, big germs. And I honestly thought that he had meningitis because he couldn't move. He would just scream in pain. He had no muscle tone. He couldn't sit up. He couldn't do anything. And I had a tooth cut out, so I was pretty out of it. So I blame myself for not catching it soon enough. But they say with leukemia, there's no stages. There's no way to know when it started. And so he took him to the hospital originally, and they said that they COVID tested him, and back then it was 5 to 7 days you had to quarantine until the results came back. And he had high fevers, 102, 103. And of course, they'd say alternate ibuprofen, Tylenol. Well, I don't know how it was with your daughter, but with my son, you're not supposed to give any ibuprofen or Tylenol. Ibuprofen is a huge no-no when you have cancer, and Tylenol can mask a fever. And so we didn't know he had leukemia, obviously, so we were doing that, and it would drop for like 30 minutes and then it would skyrocket. So we were having to do lukewarm baths, which kids do not like. They're horrible. Put ice packs, in his groin area under his arms to try to keep it down. It would spike. He would just scream and cry, and it was awful. And that was on Tuesday, and then he just kept getting worse and worse. So by Friday, I think he took him back one more time, and they gave him allergy medicine, said it was allergies. And I'm like, how the hell is this allergies? So Friday, I called the pediatrician's office, and I was like, a week ago, if my son had a fever, I would bring him to you. And somebody, I don't even remember who it was, someone along the week had told me that unless your son has 106 fever, you shouldn't even be bringing him in or worrying. And I said, 106 fever, his brain would be fried. Like 103, I'm coming somewhere. Something's going to be done. So she told me to take him to Gateway, which ended up being our home hospital. She said they have a pediatric unit. She said more than likely he's probably dehydrated since he hasn't been drinking or peeing. She said, I hope he's not, but she said, just take him there. She said, and if he needs to be admitted, they can admit him, and, he's close to home. So my ex-husband didn't get off work till like 1 a.m., and he was going to take him, and I said, no, I'm going to take him. I said, I'm going to figure out what's going on. Nobody will see him, They've already COVID tested him. I don't think it's that. Something's going on. So that was like, it's about an hour from us. I got there in probably 35 minutes. I mean, I flew. He was screaming the whole time. He was miserable. I get him in there. He couldn't touch his chin to his chest, and bend his knees at the same time, which is a sign of meningitis. So they wanted to do a lumbar puncture, which at the time was a huge thing for me. And I was like, no. I said, if everything else comes back negative, then, we'll do it, but let's do blood work. So it wasn't probably 30 minutes. The doctor comes in and says he has leukemia. My world flipped upside down. It's like 3, 4 o'clock in the morning. So nobody answers. I'm by myself with my son, and they're telling me they're going to take me 4 hours away by ambulance to Riley's. And of course, I didn't know any different. I didn't know what to do. I didn't know what to say. I just knew that I wanted to save my son's life. So the doctor was very rude, and they tell me that if I want to be able to ride in the ambulance with my son, I have to calm down. I can't be crying. I can't be upset. So I get the news that my son has leukemia, and within 10 minutes, I'm supposed to just be a calm, happy person. So I just shove it down, and the ambulance crew comes, and they let me ride with them, and we're probably like 20 minutes into the ride, and they're asking me questions, and I'm trying to answer it, but I'm trying to fight back my tears. And finally, he's like, are you okay? And I just fall apart.
And then I'm like freaking out. They're going to like kick me out. And they ended up being some of the nicest people. They were like, you lose it. You do whatever you want to do. We'll occupy him. He's like, you just got the news that your son was diagnosed. But it was like that at the beginning. I fought doctors. I fought nurses. They didn't listen to me. And then it ended up being leukemia. And then when he relapsed again, the doctors and nurses didn't listen to me. And then when he was in the hospital, there was a case where they were testing, it was labs, and they were doing something. It was one of the more extensive tests where they see how much leukemia was in the bone marrow. And this doctor came in, and of course it was on a weekend, so I couldn't get a hold of any of the actual doctors. It was a resident. And she told me that the leukemia was in 90% of his blood. And I was like, what? And she said, yeah, so it's in his heart, it's in his, any organ, his brain, anywhere you can think of, it's there. And it was 0.9. And in my head, I'm thinking that means less than 1. But she's like, no, you convert it to 90. It's 90%. I'm like, okay. So I call my family, like, we're all thinking he's going to die. Like, if it's in all of his body, like, the doctor comes in on Monday and tells me that it's 0.9, which is less than 1%, which is what I thought. I told them I never wanted to see that woman again. Like, if you can't read simple lab results